And hello, another shootout, interesting one. We've got the new Mac Mini M4, the base model, 16 gigs of RAM and the M4 processor. And I'm going to be testing this against a few other Macs and a few PCs. But the first one is really my desktop driver, daily driver, I guess, which I've been using for a few years now. And it's the Asus Zenbook Duo, which does have some distinct advantages for FL Studio, which I mentioned perhaps at the end. I've mentioned it in previous videos. Spec-wise, it's got a 10th generation i9 processor, so a bit long in the tooth now, 32 gigs of RAM, and it's got the dual screens which it's driving. So what's nice about this is you can fiddle around with the mixer with your finger quite easily as you're mixing. Almost don't need a separate control surface. You can also play with plugins with your fingertips, which is useful sometimes. So it means you can do the whole shebang with just the laptop at a stretch. Anyway, let's crack on. As usual, the one on the left will be the first reading I get. So that's the Asus Zenbook UX582. And the second reading will be the M4 Mac Mini. The reading I give you is actually a percentage of processing power as determined by the makers of FL Studio image line. So it's not especially scientific, but it is useful if you're looking at FL Studio, possibly other doors, but really FL Studio, and you want to know how it performs on different machines. And what you can do is, if I haven't covered the particular match of your machine, you can use your machine and just play it in sync using the first demo track, which is from 9 Loops and called Keep It Simple. That's the one I use. Comes with every version of FL Studio, and start it off at the same time as the video, and then you can check your own. You'll get an idea of where your machine sits with other laptops and other devices. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's get stuck in. I'll try and synchronize these two off. And out of the box, you've got 15% on the left versus 15% on the right, so even Stevens from the get-go. I must admit, I'm expecting great things from the Mac Mini M4. It only has 16 gigs of RAM, but it obviously is a superb processor and hot off the blocks, it's brand new. Still 15% versus 17% for the Mac Mini. We don't really, until the track really gets going, which is a little bit further on, we're not going to see a significant difference. What I should have done is possibly show you that they're in more or less the same place. 15% versus 20% for Mac Mini. Mac Mini's pushed up, having to work harder on the processor at this point. Now the Zenbook Duo has 32 gigs of RAM, so it has an advantage in that respect. We're now moving into the faster section. 13% versus 14%, so as I say, even Stevens pretty much. 12% versus, and the Mac has shot up to 26% already in preparation, I guess. And into the fast section, slightly out of sync as you can hear, 18% versus 31% for the Mac Mini. 18% versus 27%, just as I looked at it. 18% versus 30% for the Mac Mini, 18%, 17% for the Asus Zenbook Duo versus 33% for the Mac Mini, 22% versus 32%, 24% versus 32%, okay, 26% versus 27%, 21% versus 33%. Okay, so I think we've seen enough there. I'll stop it there. Interesting. Now, obviously FL Studio, image line, the makers of FL Studio, developed it for the PC. So I always think that PCs have an advantage. That said, it is a native version now for the Mac Mini, and it does run extremely well on the Mac line on OS X, or I can't remember what the latest version is now, but it's 15.1 actually, because I remember upgrading it when I opened the box this morning. Apologies for that noise outside. I don't know if you can see through the gap. I can see a couple of guys with chainsaws. Anyway, so I'm a little bit surprised actually. I was expecting more from the Mac Mini, but notwithstanding, especially when you look at the price. I mean, the Asus Zenbook Duo does have the advantage of a touchscreen and the dual setup. And I'll just show you what you can do here. Is I've demonstrated this quite a lot. Is you've got control over your mixer as you go along. And if you're deft enough, you can bring up plugins and you can modify those as well as you go along, all just with your hands. So I'm not going to be stopping using this anytime soon for FL Studio. It's a great all-round machine. But the Mac Mini, I think I paid $499 for this at Sterling. Superb value for money. So definitely something to have a look at. Interesting shootout. And I'm going to stop waffling now. Thanks very much for your time. If you have enjoyed this video, then please give it a like. If you want to see more videos like this, then subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to know next time I test the Mac Mini against another machine. Now, I have to say, the Asus Zenbook Duo, I think, has won almost every test. Nothing I've found has actually been able to match it in this particular performance test. But that's not to say, if I was using a generic performance test, that the Mac Mini wouldn't be ahead. But this series of videos is specific to people who want to know how FL Studio performs on devices. So bear that in mind when you're watching them. Anyway, thanks very much for your time. Hope you've enjoyed it. Bye-bye.